Greetings, everyone! Your cartoonist pal Stan here with another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show that I'm doing because this is the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons & Dragons and the entire hobby of tabletop role-playing games. And I'm celebrating that by inviting some colleagues and friends on to have conversations about our time working on D&D and beyond. And while I do that, I'm also doing a drawing. I'm doing a drawing of a cartoon homage to a classic piece of Dungeons & Dragons art. Each week I'm taking another one piece from another year up that 50-year timeline, and we're already up to the year 2001, which is the second year of 3rd edition. Kind of crazy to me that we've gotten so far so quickly. Hello, Christine. Thanks for joining up. Thank you for coming, Tina. Yeah, so we're going to be doing one of the adventures, one from the original adventure path for 3rd edition. The third adventure in that path is what I'll be doing today. Hello, Casey. So yes, that's the plan. And what I haven't talked about is my guest. My guest this week is was a member of the TSR and Wizards book department, book team, and book publishing. It went by several different names, but he was most well known for working on Forgotten Realms and one of the big wranglers of Forgotten Realms fiction in the late 90s and early aughts, and an author of his own. On his own sake, he did a couple of FR books, few FR books, at least one alternative book, and some other stuff. He'll tell us about the details. I don't need to know that. That's why I have him as a guest. And so, I'm going to bring him on right now. It is Mr. Philip Athans. I just call him Phil, but he goes by Philip. And here he is right now. Hey, Phil, how's it going?
Here I am. I'm doing great. Thank you, Stan, with an exclamation mark, for having me. This is going to be, I'm really looking forward to this.
I am too. One of the things that I hoped was going to be fun and really has been is getting a chance to sit down and talk to people that I used to hang out with all the time, and because of life, I don't talk to very often.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for agreeing to come on, and I like that. I like that T-shirt.
Thank you. It may not be officially licensed.
Well, you know what?
No.
That's not our problem anymore.
It is. I was just a victim of the whatever scam this was.
Michael and Chad, thank you for joining. Linnea, good to see you. Yeah, all we have to worry about is looking good. That's our own job these days.
And you know what? It's a little baggy around the neck, but otherwise, first edition.
That in itself, at our age, that in itself is a good thing, right?
Exactly, right?
I hate when I put on when my under T-shirt is stretched tight. That's a bad day.
I know, right? It's like it's choking me. I can't do it anymore.
So, Phil, I gave you a very loose introduction. How would you introduce yourself? How would you introduce Phil Athans?
It was not inaccurate. So I was actually hired at TSR in September of '95 to take over for Rob King, who the old timers at least will know as J. Robert King, also an author editor there. Mm-hmm. When he left, and so I was in the book, what was at TSR just referred to as the book department,
right?
And then sort of became, I don't know what, the publishing team or something like that when we came west to the coast. So moved up the ranks there from editor, senior editor, managing editor, senior managing editor, and then
out the door. As
it's a well-worn character.
I'll tell you, everyone I've had on to talk to has a story something like that.
Yeah, it all ends with a graceful exit.
Right.
Stage left.
Hopefully graceful.
I hope so in my case.
So I would say you have written. How many books have you written?
I I I'm I've counted them so many times and I can never remember, which I think is an important transition in any author's career when
Right.
you're like, I like some.
Yeah. No,
I
it's good.
think for the sort of TSR and Wizards of the Coast sort of tie-in worlds and so on, I
Hmm.
think it's 13.
Not bad.
And most of them with my name on the cover. I was GW Turba for a Dark Matter book.
Dark Matter. That
Um,
was the one.
right, Dark Matter.
You were also
That little series, which you can no one you will never find it. If you do, if you run across those Dark Matter books, get those books. We really doing something weird and cool with that, and of course, goodbye right away, pretty much.
yeah,
And I was T.H. Lane twice on two of the third edition D&D books.
right. The thin novelette sized books. There were a lot of
Right. The
good
first
writers
one,
who were T.H. Lane.
yeah. I think there were nine T.H. Lanes, I think. I was the only one who wrote two. And there were 10 of them all together. I wrote the first one and then I wrote what ended up being the last one. The first one was the Savage Caves. The last one
Right.
was the Death Ray. And then it was canceled. I didn't know that it was going to be the last one, or I would have just like blown everybody up. Redguard dies and stuff like that. But, alas, it just sort of, like everything else, just sort of fades into the ages. But those were really fun to do anyway.
Michael in chat asks, I found out recently there were Gamma World novels. Were they published during your time?
Yes, yeah. So there was that new edition of Gamma World that I thought was really cool. It was very different. It felt very like a kind of hybrid RPG and board game. I think it was Rich Baker who was kind of principally behind that. And I'm just like this huge Gamma World mega fanatic. We used to play Gamma World back in the day, like almost as much as D&D, and that's a lot, right? And so I was just like, we got to do this. We got to do this. And I got a couple of them out there, and then the whole thing, of course, right, collapsed.
Yeah.
And I blame the fans. Why didn't you embrace Gamma World? I don't know. But yeah, they were out there.
Gamma World has failed to be embraced
really
on
cool
more
direction.
editions than anything I can think
God,
of.
right?
A lot of tries at Gamma World.
Somewhere behind me, just off camera, you can't see it, but I have the original old box set, and it's a prized possession.
I bet it is. Michael says it has more editions in D&D. It has many more editions in D&D.
It might just, yeah.
Gamma World is one of those. There are a lot of products out there that the game designers and game company owners love that the market never loves enough.
Right. There was that really pulpy Buck Rogers game that I think like 4 people worldwide actually bought.
Yeah.
But it's brilliant, like amazing example of next level RPG design. So you see that all the time. There's just stuff that's like, I mean, how cool. I keep pointing with my thumb to a shelf you can't see behind me, but all those things that I just thought were unbelievably amazing, like Sky Realms of Jorun or the Whispering Vault,
right,
that are just, they just go. And I think that's still happening, right? There's so much happening in the RPG sphere, right? The tabletop sphere, that it's impossible to keep track of it. There's just games coming like crazy, which is amazing and awesome, by the way.
All right. You touched on something that the way I like to start these conversations is way back in the day when So let's just start with how did you discover? You and I, we found out as we were
Hmm.
leading up to this, are very close in career and age and everything. So we discovered the game about the same time,
Hmm.
certainly the same era. How did you discover role playing? Was it D&D? Was it Gamma World? What was it that
It
you?
was, believe it or not, right? And this one goes into the absolute dustiest corners of the history of this. The first thing like a role playing game I ever played was the Fantasy Trip.
Wow,
So the I for a birthday or whatever wrangled my parents a check out of my parents to subscribe to Analog magazine because right, science
science
fiction.
fiction.
And in or I think it was on the back cover of Analog every month, a company called Metagaming, which I think transitioned to Steve Jackson games,
Hmm.
or he took all of his because all the games were designed by Steve Jackson,
Right.
and that was like Ogre and stuff like that. And he had one called Melee that was just gladiator combat. Like it was a little paper board. They were very much like cheap ass games, if you know those.
Yeah.
Very, very cheap, very small. And I had a friend, this is junior high, right? So seventh, eighth grade. And we would obsessively buy and play these little games. And Melee then had an expansion called Wizard that added spells to that, but it was just you fighting little counters like head to head. And unbeknownst to me, there was this thing called Dungeons and Dragons out there I had not heard of. And Steve Jackson obviously had, and created a program, what he called a programmed adventure for that game, where you would create a character and you would go, it was like a solo
Mm.
RPG kind of thing, and you would go through this dungeon basically. And it was my friend who said, we should probably just get D&D because I think that's what they're doing, like kind of ripping that off. And I was like, what's D&D? And he was like, oh, it's Dungeons and Dragons, and he kind of described it, but he didn't really know what it was. But he got a copy of it. This was the basic set with the blue book inside,
Right.
and those crazy cheap dice that would just immediately get all just right. The 20-sided die that would perpetually roll because it became a golf ball after like the first game. And we started playing that. So knowing no one who was playing this, he's like, come over and we're going to play this. I was like, all right. And he has whatever, but it was like B1, that module that came inside there. And he's like, all right, so we have to create a character. So we're just reading the rule book like we would for a board game. Like, no idea
Yeah.
of any kind of, right? Just going through. And so I'm just rolling 3 6-sided dice in order for each thing. And it's just me and him, right? He's the dungeon master, and it's just me. So it just happened that I rolled my highest score was intelligence. And so he's like, oh, well, it says that if you have, you need a high intelligence to be a magic user. And I thought that sounded like fun. Like, I'm a magic user.
Yeah.
So we go through the whole thing, including rolling hit points. And it took us a while to figure out how to read a 4-sided die, right? Like, which is it was really the rite of passage for any gamer. And so I rolled that, and I rolled a 1 for hit points. And I thought, and I even said, that can't be right, because it seems like anything that hits me is going to get a 1 at least, right? And then, so am I just going to die right away? And he's like, no, that can't be. That can't be. That can't be it. So we're like,
True.
okay. So anyway, I had my 1 spell and my 1 hit point. So I'm like, let's go. Right away, I don't know if it's programmed into, or, it's actually written into the module, or if it was a wandering monster, 1 skeleton. And I was like, ooh, that's cool, because a big fan of this, what is that, the Jason and the Argonauts, or Sinbad?
Right.
I'm like, yeah, I'm fighting a skeleton. This is super cool. The skeleton wins initiative. We rolled a hit. We're looking at the charts exactly like you would for, a strategy board game. It hits me. I have a 9 armor class, right? This was the old system with the 9 armor class was no armor. And of course it hits me, and you have to roll 1d6 for damage. And whatever it was more than 1. I was like, so am I just dead? And we're looking, he starts pouring through the rule book for an out. Like, is there some way that I'm misunderstanding this? And I'm just sitting there like, that's it? Because I walked in there, it just killed me. Game over. And I actually remember this. Like, how do you not remember this after the life that then moved forward from there? I actually said, this game sucks. And that was it. For the rest of the summer, that was summer vacation, we did not try to play D&D ever again. And then started high school, where we met another group of people, right? Including a guy who happened to be in our art class who had really been playing D&D, like really like every week in a big group. And I told him this story, and he's like, no, right? Like, you're not necessarily supposed to take it that like you're reading, like you're going to first play Monopoly for the first time, and you just kind of go like, this is what you do, right? And so it kind of set us straight. And then once I actually played it like for real, I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I mean, it was just like right after that initial, this game sucks, it was, now I adopt this lifestyle.
Right. This game,
and that was,
but I want to love it.
Yeah, it was. And then maybe that helped in some way, right? To have that, like, completely misunderstanding it, and then because it requires somebody to kind of bring you in, doesn't it? Like,
yeah, well, it always has.
This is how you do it.
It always has. Okay, I'm gonna tell you once again how parallel our lives are. Because although I did know about, I heard about D&D before anything else, but I couldn't get the game. It wasn't available. I couldn't find anywhere to get it.
Oh no, yeah.
What I got was, and I pulled this up on another show, the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons coloring album.
Nice. I've never seen that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
There was a kind of like a couple of years ago, back in 1978-79, there was a renaissance of grown-ups coloring books.
Coloring books,
so
yeah. I had a science fiction coloring book, I think, by the same people.
Yeah.
That was where I first heard of Dune, and then my mother bought the book, and I read that, and that was instantly a favorite.
This is written by Gary Gygax.
Terrific.
And in the middle of it, there's a board game.
Oh, okay.
So that was the first game I played, the first Dungeons and Dragons game I played. Was that board game. And then I got the the blue book box set also. Right. I also rolled my first character, and he was a wizard. And I thought that was awesome. And he also died in his very first encounter. But in that case, it was Village of Hamlet with a giant toad at the moat house.
All right, so that's you. I think your story is better because at least I was killed by a cool monster.
All right, I'm going to switch our views here. So I'm going to start. Speaker in Dreams is the product that I'm going to be doing homage to tonight. An interesting cover by Jeff Easley. I love it. It's the only cover I can think of with a purple worm.
I know, right? One of my favorite monsters that just you never actually see it. You never encounter it.
All right. So you got in high school. You finally found someone who could teach you how to play, and you started playing. You realized how much you loved it.
It was crazy. So there happened to be a teacher who was the photography teacher, and I was like an art nerd kid, right? I was in all the art classes, and he was also like really playing D&D at the time, like in a big way. And so we talked to him and said, can we start a club, right? Because you needed to have a faculty advisor, right? Somebody who was going to.
All right, it seems like we are live again. Apologies to everyone. For some reason, software kind of crapped out. But so Phil, we may or may not recover our audience, but that doesn't mean we can't continue because these shows go in the archive and people actually get a lot of people coming to watch them on rerun. So,
oh sure, yeah. This will live on forever and ever.
Yes. I've had, there was at least one episode that didn't get seen by anyone. We just, in the middle of recording, something like this happened, and we just went and finished it. See, we've already got at least one person coming back to watch us live, so we have something of an audience.
Welcome back.
All right, so, what were we in the midst of talking about?
I don't remember. Oh, just basically how D&D and role-playing games in general, right? Traveler really taught me more in high school than any of the teachers.
Casey's back. Hey, Casey.
Really fascinating, but there's no reason to go back.
Right. Well, I mean, I was going to say that, there's a lot of people that have at least similar stories that, things that they didn't find at all interesting, like math, particularly math, that D&D was a way to give your brain the footing to get it.
No, really, because to me, right, math, I think the more I've thought about this, right, for decades later, is if the math teachers had ever said, this is why you're doing this, right? You aren't just turning this string of letters and numbers into another string of letters and numbers or a number or whatever, and we are just doing it as some sort of esoteric exercise. And I might have learned from them, right? Instead, I learned from, Gary Gygax and Mark Miller and Jeff Grubb and whoever else, right? I was a big Traveler fan and wrote some stuff for Mega Traveler during that period of time. And I was fascinated by starship design and Mega Traveler in particular.
Right.
And I feel like I should have some kind of honorary PhD in engineering from, being able to actually create something with that unbelievably math-intensive set of rules. But I found that immensely fascinating, like hours at a time, to sort of generating starships and whole solar systems and stuff.
Right.
And just doing math, and science, right?
Yes.
And engineering. It's amazing.
It's certainly as someone who has done education, who has done teaching. I never lost that same idea of, you need to give the because I love it doesn't mean you're going to love it or get it.
Right.
And I've got to give you.
That's what I always got from math teachers in particular, was to sort of like, what are you, dumb? Why do you not? You're just looking at me like I'm not even speaking English. And it's like, 'cause you're not, man. You're just like talking in some sort of gibberish to me. Tell me what we're supposed to do here. And I think that's why so many kids would always say, like, I'm never going to use that. It's like,
right.
I don't know, unless you start
don't understand
Traveler.
it.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah. All right. So you were writing for Mega Traveler, you were saying.
I was, yeah. So at some point I thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool to actually, because, I'm creating my own D&D campaign, doing all of this, like, run this long running campaign of my own and so on. And at that point, had gone to film school, really. My degree is in, cinema and photography, but really, basically film school. And I was writing and that was my concentration there, was in screenwriting. I'm in Chicago. I don't know how I'm going to be a screenwriter, but I just really wanted to write. So I was sending short stories out, all that kind of stuff. Had published a literary magazine called Alternative Fiction and Poetry, and
Yeah.
started to think, could I be doing this more professionally here? And, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to, take this love of RPGs out there and start doing some, freelance work. And I did, and I ended up, selling some like articles to what became Challenge Magazine, or was the Journal of the Travelers Aid Society, sending stuff to Dragon and getting rejection letters, so on. But, as I started to build up, a little bit, of a sort of, not really a name for myself, but at least I was getting some work out there.
Right.
Um, and being in Chicago was actually, or in the Chicago area, was really kind of a plus for role-playing games, because TSR was right in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which is in southern Wisconsin, where I'm kind of northern Illinois. Mayfair Games was there in Chicago. I actually went in and interviewed for a job there. They ended up throwing me some freelance work. I wrote a a book on ghosts, apparitions for Chill, their sort of second edition Chill game,
Mm-hmm.
and they had hired me to write one of their big D&D supplements. I was going to do the Elemental Plane of Earth, but then TSR yanked their approved for use with status, yanked
Yeah, that
everybody's
was
approved
fun.
for use with status, and that one just disappeared, which was sad because it was going to be super cool. um, and it's just started writing more stuff for Traveler, and it was actually a proposal for a freelance project that I sent to TSR that got me the job there, sort of in a roundabout way. And the idea that I had was, I called it Greyhawk 2000, and it
Right.
was at the time, the year in Greyhawk was 10 something. And I thought, well, this is basically the medieval period in the world of Greyhawk. What's that world going to look like in the year 2000, right? A thousand years later. Wouldn't it, or could it, progress more or less the same as ours, right? So it's Greyhawk, but with, uh, sort of present day technology, but also with magic, and also with elves, and also, right? And so I wrote up a thing, sent that in, and I only found out later that Jim Ward, who was in charge of the, basically the entire D&D team at the time,
Mm-hmm.
liked the idea. And the version of it that I heard, which is probably apocryphal, so, Jim, if you're out there, right, and this is not true, I don't necessarily believe it was true, really liked it, but didn't want to throw it at some freelancer he didn't know. So he said, let's find a way to hire this guy. And that was when Rob King had decided to leave, and Brian Thompson was looking for an editor. And so he sort of nudged Brian in my direction,
Mm.
and I started working there. But Greyhawk 2000 never did anything until I floated the idea again years later after we came to Wizards, and it was about to be the year 2000. And we sort of they put a little team together. It was myself, Lisa Stevens, and Ted Stark. And we would sit in a conference room like a couple times a week and brainstorm this. And they got Sam Wood to do some amazing concept art for it. Unfortunately, it only ended up being one adventure in Dungeon and an article in Dragon from
Right.
about that time.
Yeah, I was going to say I remember
Um,
that being in Dragon right around
yeah.
right around the either just before third edition. I feel like it
Hmm.
might have been part of
It
the
was,
25th anniversary celebration.
yeah, it was, I think it was for Alternity, right? Because I think at that point, Alternity had just come out. And because there was going to be guns, and there was going to be computers, and there was going to be, cars or whatever, whoever it was, and I know, again, I'm not, nobody was the bad guy in any of this, just said, let's make it an Alternity setting, right?
Right.
And I thought I don't know about that, right? But it's kind of cool in that it's sort of bridging between D&D and alternity, right? Between fantasy and science fiction. And, I don't know, alternity also
Right.
didn't quite get
That's
there.
that's that's
And
one of the
so
drawbacks, not knowing the game.
there it goes, right? I mean, in the end, right, the lesson learned is no, fight for it to be D&D because D&D is not going anywhere. Parts of D&D go places, right? Um, a lot of I had was sort of an editor for some of the Birthright books when that was new, and that so there are sort of campaign settings and pieces of D&D that have definitely fallen by the wayside over the years, for sure.
Michael, yeah, offline on Facebook, yes. The program crashed, and the only way to get back quick was to come just to YouTube. So thank you for finding us again, Michael. The whole thing will go up on. I'll edit it all together, and it'll go up on repeat. But thank you for coming back.
Yay.
All right. So that's how you got into the door. You got into the Willy Wonka's world.
By a very weird set of because I didn't apply for a job. I sent in this proposal that seemed to just disappear, and I heard nothing. And I was at my weekly D&D game in the basement of Games Plus, this great store that's still there in Mount Prospect, Illinois. And I came from work where I was managing a record store at the time, the day job, right? And my friends were there and we were getting ready to play, and they said, "Oh, your wife just called and she said to call her back." This is pre-cell phone, obviously. And she said there was a message on the machine from TSR and they want you to come in for an interview. And I was like, why would they want to interview me for like a freelance thing? That's weird. So I called her, and I was the whole night I was kind of like trying to play D&D and thinking, why did TSR call me for an interview? I don't even understand what this is. And so the next day when I called Brian Thompson, who was then, I think whatever his title was, like executive editor for book publishing, he told me what the job was, and I was like, well, that sounds fantastic. Let's go, right? Let's go. And set up that interview. Left the interview saying that was amazing. I'm going to have that story for the rest of my life. Too bad I didn't get that. I was absolutely sure that I just crashed and burned. But at the same time, I was just that was just really cool to sort of see that weird building and in Lake Geneva.
Right.
Really could, I mean, I don't know, right? I could have died right there when he called me back and said, all right, do you want to do this thing? Let's go. And I was like, yeah, it's about an hour drive. I'm leaving now.
You want me to start I'll start in 90 minutes.
Yeah. I don't have cell phones. Those were like things that rich people had at the time, but I'll be thinking in the car, and I'll have anything you want that you need from me when I get there.
All right, so you joined the book department, which you had you had not planned to do. But I mean, with your background with starting short stories and all that, it certainly seems like a good fit.
Yeah, I think one of the it was of course this was like punk rock Phil, tortured artist Phil, 20-year-old Phil. Like, why is nobody publishing my great works of disturbing and disruptive genius? And it didn't occur to me that it just was bad. That can't be it. Um, but I was also reading punk fanzines at the time, it was a huge thing, and didn't really know about the entire whole zine scene that was going on at the time in the early and mid '80s,
Right.
and just saw those punk, fanzines, and said, "Well, I'm just going to do one of these, but for like transgressive fiction." And alternative fiction and poetry was born. And, it lasted 5 issues. I'm very proud of it, right? Looking back on it now, it's hyper primitive, right? This is very pre-internet. So it cost me an enormous amount of money. But I think if you don't file for bankruptcy at least once in your 20s, you really haven't lived.
Yeah.
You're not really fully an American yet, right? That you haven't grasped the entrepreneurial spirit in full. But again, I definitely don't think I'd be here now if not for that. Right? This was trial by fire, right? It was a fire that I set, that I
Right.
jumped into, right? And just had to learn how to do this because I felt like there was nobody else to do it. And that was sort of the part of the resume that I think got me that job. And, talking with Brian, who is like the most well-read person I think I've ever met,
Yeah.
I had gotten a piece from, William S. Burroughs, Jello Biafra from Dead Kennedys, and, Charles Bukowski were all in there. And he knew those authors, and I think that meant something to him, thankfully. There was some connection there. But anyway, it was me, and I was there for 15 years.
So when you got there, what were you working on in your early days?
So Brian's thing was, don't let anybody specialize, right? He didn't want there to be a Forgotten Realms editor, a Ravenloft editor, etc. So he would assign everything. Brian would, go through the whole process of assigning an author to a book, kind of getting a sense of what that's going to be. And then he would just kind of say, okay, Phil, you've got this Birthright book. And then you've got this one Forgotten Realms book. And so, I think looking back, even though it felt a little bit, I always felt a little bit off balance. Again, that kind of trial by fire where you couldn't really just immerse yourself in one of these campaign settings and know everything. You had to know as much as you possibly could about all of them because you never knew what you were going to get next, right? So I was the editor on Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, Ravenloft, Birthright, some of the old TSR books lines.
Right.
Like the book Larry Elmore and his cousin Bob or Robert Elmore wrote. That was one of the first ones that I worked on. Planescape. I mean, all sorts of stuff. And that was just, I think looking back, it was really cool. But then when we came out to Seattle and Wizards of the Coast, Brian didn't come with us. And Mary Kirchhoff came back in, who had been running the book publishing team years before. She wanted to, and I think that was really Peter Atkinson's kind of thing, right? That he had creative directors or brand managers for each of those brands or those lines.
Right.
And so she wanted to kind of sync up with that. So being kind of the guy with 2 years or just under 2 years of seniority, I was kind of the top guy there. Like there were so many people in that team didn't come with us, and so they were like new people.
Yeah, the book department, unlike the games department, the book
Mhm.
department was filled with people who really didn't come because they loved TSR and D&D. They came because they
Right.
were book people, and they
Yeah.
had more roots in the area. They didn't want to move.
Right. Yeah. And so there was like So when I first started there, Bill Larson was there, who was really became, whether he liked it or not, right, my editing mentor. I learned more from him than any other one person in terms of especially copy editing and just how to do this job.
Right.
But he was, the same age I am now back then. And he wasn't going to move from, a house in wherever, Kenosha or wherever he lived. He's got grandchildren there and stuff. He's not, right?
Right.
It was, he ended up kind of being a remote editor for a little while, and there were a couple other people who just decided not to go. And I think the book publishing team that came from Wisconsin to Seattle was just myself and Peter Archer. And he stole Liz Baldwin away from the periodicals guys, who were always right across the hall from us.
Right.
There was also Brian Thompson's territory back in the day. And then started hiring people. So it was real. The book team was just the two of us when we actually hit the ground and rented.
It's amazing how quickly you can rise to the top.
I know, right? And so basically I had my choice of, well, what do you want to do, right? Because they had a freelance editor for Dragonlance that Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman really, really liked and worked and really wanted to keep working with. And so, right away I just said, well, Forgotten Realms,
Right.
like, obviously, I'll take the one that sells like crazy. And so that was pretty much the rest of the time. That was when I moved from, I lived in suburban Chicago to Seattle, and I also moved into the Forgotten Realms and just lived there for years and years and years. Lived there.
So, you, Bob Salvatore was already doing stuff, right? Or Ari.
Yeah.
We call him Bob, but Ari Salvatore.
We call him Bob. It's Bob. What's up, Bob? That's actually his name. R is for Robert. But So this is weird. Here's a weird little story, right? And this is so long ago that I don't think anybody's going to be mad at me. The person who owned TSR for the last years of its existence could be a little bit temperamental, right? And I think there was, and this is before I showed up, right? So I wasn't in any way part of this. A negotiation for a new set of books from Bob Salvatore, and he was pressing for whatever, more money, whatever it was, and they couldn't really come to an agreement. So she just said, "Forget it. Nobody here is a star. He doesn't get to, he can't tell us whatever." So right. All of a sudden, he just walked away. He's like, "Well, forget it then. I'll go do my own stuff." And so I was hired into that post Ari Salvatore world, where they had hired another author to take on to sort of continue the Dritz series, if you can believe that could possibly be true. And I'm kind of like, I guess that's how it works, right? I don't know. And so at TSR, I was given the paper galleys on 11 by 17 sheets, right? So it's the book printed out exactly as it was laid out. It was all typeset, and it was what was going to be sent to the printer.
Right.
And it was at that final stage. And I was given that, and then TSR basically shut down, right? And things weren't being printed. That didn't go to the printer. It was scheduled to go, but it was just sitting there waiting. And then, I'm like fast forwarding through a lot of a gigantic transition in the the life of this whole setup. But we ended up at Wizards of the Coast, and Mary Kirchhoff was brought in to replace Brian Thompson, and she was the person who found R.A. Salvatore in the slush pile,
Right.
and was his first editor for the Crystal Shard in 1988. So he was her first call. Like, forget anything that happened or any animosities. Nobody that you were talking to works anymore. Let's get the band back together. And she's like, okay, you're going to be his editor then. And I was like, okay, suppose. So, just was instrumental in sort of bringing him back into the realms. And that was the first book that I worked on of his was The Silent Blade. And the last one was Gauntled Grip. So I was his editor through that whole period there. I still had that copy. I kept it with me that was in the lid of a box of paper, right?
Yeah.
And when I left, I gave it to Susan Morris, who was still there. I said, all right, I'm going to make you the keeper of Shores of Dusk, which was the Drizzt novel written by another author. I suppose I could say his name, it doesn't matter, but that was never published, and that, Mary had assured him that it will never under any circumstances see the light of day. That was written, that was typeset, that was done. It was ready to go. And if TSR hadn't basically descended into insolvency, it would have been published. And the history of Drizzt and the Forgotten Realms and R.A. Salvatore and all of it would have looked a lot different.
Wow. So, has it never been announced? And I'm not pushing you to do this. Mm-hmm. Has it never been revealed who that author was? That was.
I don't know. I mean, it was so at the point of done that it was probably in a catalog somewhere. Like it had probably, it would have been on the schedule. It would have been, Random House would have had it probably in a catalog.
Yeah. That's what I was.
And again, this was, now we're talking about like 30 years ago, right? But and I'm sure that by now there's no, those are my dogs barking in the background. If you can hear that, I don't know. They're like, don't get too deep into this.
Like,
I don't know how many frayed feelings there still are 3 decades later, but I doubt it. Right?
Yeah, that's why I don't want to push you.
Close one.
But yeah, it doesn't surprise me. Particularly looking back, it doesn't surprise me because Lorraine Williams, who was the owner of TSR, her family were the owners of Buck Rogers because they bought it out because the person that had created it had done work for hire. So she saw Drizzt and all these characters in exactly the same light.
And that language stayed in all of those books, right? It was always work for hire. Nobody owned Forgotten Realms but TSR and Wizards of the Coast after Ed Greenwood sold it to them, right? Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman did not own Dragonlance.
And still do not.
And Bob Salvatore did not own Drizzt, right? It actually says, if you have any of the old paperbacks, you'll see where it says, all of the characters and the distinctive likenesses thereof, etc., are wholly owned by. Obviously in the years since then, right, with just a whole new culture, etc., a lot of that was softened, right? So you haven't seen anybody else writing that character, right?
Right.
You haven't. And fortunately, we were able to kind of come out of that and have just a whole different set of relationships with authors that, that kind of Brian Thompson period just didn't have. Yeah,
but the thing I think fans need to tuck into their heart somewhere,
Yeah.
and authors need to. It's those things are still true. Those
Hmm.
properties are now owned by Hasbro. That
Right.
it's only by the good graces of Mr. Potato Head that
Hmm.
Bob is getting to carry on Driz. That and I
Right.
mean, the fans have a lot to do with that, right? The fans revolt,
Well, sure.
and
Right.
but legally, someday
Hmm.
someone else is going to be writing Driz, and you know,
It hasn't been my problem for a while now, so I don't know how to answer that, but it's true, right? And also, right, Bob Salvatore wrote a bunch of Star Wars novels. He
yeah,
killed Chewbacca, right? And he doesn't own Star Wars. He doesn't own Chewbacca in any way, right? So this is how that works. If you're coming in on into somebody else's playground, that's their playground.
right, right. Um, so who else? Who else do you have fond memories, or at least entertaining memories of working with?
God, literally everybody, and that was the thing. So having once we got out to after those really really difficult days, the last few months of TSR where it just was clear that things were collapsing, and then Peter Atkinson swoops in, right? The Sarah Angel, and just rescues us all and brings us out here.
Yeah,
There was a real sense of new life. And he even said that. He's like, start spending money, make stuff again, and make it good, right? Which we didn't hear a lot of at TSR. It was more like make stuff and shut up. Shut up and make stuff that I tell you to make. And so, having now become the Forgotten Realms line editor, I was sort of put in with what then had become the Forgotten Realms, sort of core D&D group. And to me, those were like the salad days, right? Where the meetings were myself, Stephen Shend, Julia Martin, and Dale Donovan. And that was just where we would come up with big picture stuff. That was the beginning of what I called the realm shaking events, right? That
right.
was the threat from the sea and the Year of Rogue Dragons, those things that would then bleed off into uh, finally for the first time, it seemed like ever.
Wait, hold. Say,
Um,
can you say that again? Your audio cut out for a second.
oh, where what did I miss?
Just
Just
the last two sentences of what you said.
oh,
The realm
it
shaking
was where we
events.
were really, yeah, we were finally really synced up, right? So that there would be the trilogy of books and a related anthology, and then game products as well, adventures and setting stuff, right? In the
Right.
Sea of Fallen Stars or whatever. And there was that really great period still in second edition where, I fully committed to continuity, and which was enormously complicated at the time. Um, the Forgotten Realms, I hate to say that it was over designed, but it was like tragically over designed. There was just not a single corner of that map that wasn't, extremely detailed. And, looking back, that was felt like kind of maybe a little bit too much, but at the time it was like I live in this world. And so it became writing and definitely editing Forgotten Realms novels wasn't really like writing fantasy, it was like writing historical fiction. It required that much research.
right.
You couldn't make anything, basically. It was already there for you. And there was no sort of, oh, but it would be cooler if. It's like, yeah, too late. That was in the Waterdeep box set, along with the other 4 million words of text in the Waterdeep box set. And
You,
that's what Waterdeep is now.
You know what? Here's one of my little bits. I did not do much for uh, Realms. I did not interact with the Realms a
Hmm.
lot. I did do one short story for one of your anthologies,
Hmm.
Realms of Magic,
Yeah.
and I invented a town. I put something on the map that wasn't there before.
Shocking. See, but as a D&D industry insider at the time, you could do that, right?
Yeah,
Because then, and that was the thing. Once that was read into the canon, that was in the canon.
yeah.
That town was there now.
That town is now there.
It
It
will
was
be, and
it
it will
was
be there forever.
it was purposely a town that by design was one that no one
Hmm.
went to and very few people knew about.
Yeah.
But
Well, you
it's
had, I mean, there's got to be some towns like that, right? In between here and there.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's still I don't even remember the name of it because the action started in that town and then went to a town that was on the map.
Right. You got to hit the one.
Right.
And I see the comment here. Yeah, I think it was the book was called Vector Prime, where he dropped a moon on Chewbacca, Bob Salvatore,
Yeah. Well, but
and
I mean the thing to know about
he
that
got
is
death. He got death threats after
they
that.
told him to do that. Well, they didn't tell him to
Yeah,
drop
no,
a
no,
moon on
right.
there. They told
Yeah,
him to
he
kill
did.
Chewbacca.
Yeah, it was. I think it was. I don't remember. The New Jedi Order was the series, and that was all mapped out. That wasn't just sort of like, oh, well, I mean, I guess this guy just killed Chewbacca, so there's no more Chewbacca. Oh, well, I guess we just live with that, right? As rigidly controlled as the Forgotten Realms was at the time, Star Wars was 100 million times more rigidly controlled.
Yeah.
And, it was something it was a book that he was assigned to write, essentially. But he got death threats about that. Like, seriously, people threatening to kill him because he killed Chewbacca, which, as we all know, was made, apocryphal anyway. So all's well that ends well for Chewie.
Thank goodness.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I remember talking to him after that. How I mean, he didn't even really want to do it, but th- this was the
I know
book they
people,
would give him, and he wanted to get other books.
right? He wanted to get in on Star Wars, and why wouldn't you, right?
Right.
And it's probably out there on the internet, but he met Peter Mayhew, right, who plays Chewbacca,
Yeah.
at a convention, and there's this great picture of Peter Mayhew like pretending to strangle him, and
Right.
his hands are just like enormous, giant hands around his neck. I don't know if that somewhere on the internet you'll find Peter Mayhew strangling Ari Salvatore.
I got to meet Mayhew once too. Super nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't try to
And
strangle me, but I didn't kill his character.
well, right? Sometimes you deserve a little strangulation.
Right. Right. I'm not saying I wouldn't have let him if he asked, but
uh, it was I mean, working at Wizards and TSR was a great way to sort of meet some of the right to
yeah.
go to be sent to conventions to work with people, and being this right guy who wears a AD&D Player's Handbook T-shirt and was playing D&D obsessively from the summer of 1978 through. Starting working at TSR, for me, I would fanboy out. Like, I'm meeting people who are just now my coworkers who were like names and credits where I'm like, oh my God, it's Kim Mohan. It's
Yeah.
Steve Winter. Like, I knew of these people, right? I saw names like Harold Johnson in the, in the credits. Um, I didn't know any of the insider stuff, right? I thought Gary Gygax still worked there. I think I can tell this story. I don't think this is going to get me in trouble. Is this going to get me in trouble? Because you'll remember John Pickens,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
He would sit there was like a lunchroom in the old building in Lake Geneva. And the book team was in this weird little corner of the building, separated from everything and everyone else. And really, the only way out was either a back door out into the parking lot or into the sort of, kind of break room, lunchroom thing. And then you would have to kind of go through all these weird corridors and stuff to get to anywhere or anyone else. So, I would be going back and forth there. The bathrooms were there and so on. And there was always a guy with a gray beard, right? Sitting there reading the newspaper. And I was like, is that Gary Gygax? For like 3-4 months. I was like, I think that has to be Gary Gygax, right? Because he doesn't seem to be working or doing anything. He's just always kind of there and reading the newspaper and sometimes chatting with people. And like, is that him? And I was way too embarrassed to ask, okay, is that Gary Gygax in there? But of course, Gary had been, exited from the company way before that, in that now infamous kind of hostile takeover that I knew nothing about.
So sounds like you're talking about Doug Stewart.
Was it?
I think it was. First of all, Pickens never had a beard, and
no,
he didn't hang out. He didn't hang out in that area. He was always doing work. Okay. But Doug Stewart spent most of his day.
I think it was Doug Stewart. John, if you're out there, I apologize. And Doug, I don't know what to tell you, man. Get to work.
Doug, sadly is no longer with us.
Well, that's too bad.
But I think he'd appreciate that story.
Anyway, for at least a few months, I was sure that I was in the presence of Gary Gygax. Alas, nope. I did get to talk to Dave Arneson on the phone toward the end of my time at Wizards, though, which was pretty cool.
That's nice. What was that about?
They had recontacted him. I want to say this was 4th edition, right? Where finally there was going to be a credit to, like, this is based on D&D originally created by, right, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson.
Well, it did that for 3rd edition.
Was that 3rd edition?
Yeah.
And then there was, I think there was some talk about we're going to maybe do a Blackmore something that I think would have been for 4th edition. And that's what I was just sort of talking to him about that.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the conversation was about. It was very short. And this is the thing, right? I mean, how nerdy am I? This nerdy. These were giants in the earth to me, right?
Right.
To meet like some of the artists, right? Brahm was, I think, full-time then. Jeff Easley.
Mm-hmm.
It was like
Jeff Easley doing his drawing.
Yeah, right. There he is. I mean, these were like,
I'm butchering his drawing right now.
Right. There he is. And, one of the first authors I worked with was Troy Denning, whose books I had been reading myself, right? Dark Sun in particular. And, I was like, this is really cool. These were like rock stars.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of experiences like that too. And I had friends of mine, it's a friend of mine who helped me move in when I got there. And a few months later, I'm talking to him on the phone, and something came up. I was like, I've got to go do this. And he's like, I keep forgetting where you work. I'm like, you work here.
There was one time where I was at Gen Con, and my friends from like high school that I used to play D&D with were all there, right, at the convention.
Mm-hmm.
And they were asking, like, are we going to go, like, we're going to go to dinner or something like that? And I was like, no, I've got to do this thing. And I just called him Bob Salvatore. And one of my friends was like, oh, yeah. Bob Salvatore. I was
Yeah,
like, well, that's actually his name. I mean, we don't call him R.A. Hey, R.A., what's happening, buddy? You know,
yeah,
like, but there was that weird sense of like, Phil's friends with this guy, and we've read all of his books. Like, we've been reading his
yeah.
books for years, you know. And it, but it was thrown at me like I was kind of like putting on airs, like, oh yeah, yeah, it's me and Bob.
Oh,
And
you
you know, I
and
know you've
Bob,
met him
huh?
before. He is just like the least movie star kind of guy, right?
Yeah,
Entirely down to earth, super friendly guy, and I don't know. It was it that's there's something incredibly weird about just you're there working in this place that was the source of the magic thing that completely transformed my life, right? It was after the initial this game sucks, it was at least 4 years of high school as an intensive style choice.
right.
And just working there was surreal and amazing. And you know, I left in 2010, and you know, there's no way to have a job that's always 100% perfect. At
Right.
least I don't know anybody who's ever had one, and it wasn't 100% perfect, obviously. And there were a million things I would have done differently, and I wish didn't happen, et cetera, et cetera. But now I can't really put my finger on too many of those, and they seem like, well, that's just petty, and who cares, you know,
Yeah.
whatever. The 99.9% of it is just great memories.
Yeah, and the part of it is, and I've been back since, right? I did two contracts at,
Mm-hmm.
in the teens here,
Yeah.
and you know, it's so funny that even when I went to work at Upper Deck, right? I'd
Mm-hmm.
I'd had enough of it. I'm like, you know what? I understand that this is a business, but it's still a cool place. But you've got to
Yeah.
remember
Right.
that in the end, it's a business, and business
Yeah.
things are going to happen there. And
Yep.
the people I think, the people I've met who carry around grudges or just hurt feelings are the ones who never saw that. They only saw this is the place where dreams come
Mm-hmm.
true, and we're making
Yeah.
dreams.
Oh, yeah. No, and you know, I was always tried to remember that somewhere behind this book, right, that I'm working on,
Yeah,
is a actual real fan. Like, these are people who are like, "Ooh, a new Forgotten Realms novel came out today," right? Like,
right.
and just immediately bought it. And that was the reader that I was always working toward. Always. Like, first I have to make sure that I'm serving the fan, right?
Right.
And then if that finds other kind of an audience out there, then great, right? But whatever this is, it has to be the best Forgotten Realms novel I can make in the time allotted for the budget allotted and all that kind of thing, which was
Well, there's
never
reality.
enough. It was never enough time, but you know,
So what are you doing now, Phil?
I am doing the same thing more or less, right? But without the that work for hire aspect to it, right? Without the corporation part. So I mean, basically what I am is a freelance editor, but I do just, you know, so editing, writing about writing, teaching writing, writing books about writing, etc., uh, and just continuing to live inside of books, but just on my own terms for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know you're going to have links here, but you know, I wrote a book called The Guide to Writing Fantasy and Science Fiction. And in order to promote that, it was coming out in 2010. All I'm reading is you should have a blog.
Right.
because it was like 2009, right? And so I was like, well, I'll start a blog to kind of start talking about that and see if I can get anyone to care. And so it was June of 2009 I started that. I was still working at Wizards then. And I still update that every Tuesday. It's called Fantasy Author's Handbook. And I know you've got a link for it.
I do, but
So,
it'd be when we pop back to the other screen, which I'm going to do now. Given where we're at time wise, I'm going to come back to just talking to you. This,
okay.
those of you who are watching, going to finish up this homage the way I have the others. And if you
Mm-hmm.
are a subscriber to the Substack, the free newsletter, 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com, you'll be the first people to get to see it when it's done. And
Sure.
lots of cool other stuff. And I'll mention that again before we wrap up. But let me switch back here, move away from this Jeff Easley image to just you and me. Because once I'm here, I can bring up the fantasyhandbook.wordpress.com, which you were just talking about.
Mm-hmm. Right. Still on the free WordPress service. I'm not paying for that URL. I'm not going to pay. It's been 15 years. All of a sudden, I'm going to change that. So that's updated every Tuesday, and there you're going to find links to literally my entire universe. I've got just started up. It's the little tiny YouTube channel that could, and hopefully will someday.
I understand that.
Yeah, there you'll find links to books that I've written, all sorts of like online tutorials and so on. How to hire me to edit your book, etc., which is Athansassociates.com. But this is what I'm doing. I'm still here in shockingly expensive Seattle, treading water, not really, but, making a living in books, which is all I've ever really wanted to do.
It's I love when conversations can end with yes, and I am still doing it because
And
that's
I'm still, you know what? I'm not gonna stop.
right.
This is it. I don't know. It's like the Winchester house, right? If I stop editing, then I die. As long as there's a work in progress,
Right.
I progress.
You're like a prose shark.
Exactly. Exactly. Really, really old, a little bitey.
Been around since the dinosaurs.
Exactly.
Just got to
But,
keep moving.
I.
Chris Andro asks, "Did you guys ever have any epic playtesting sessions? Can you remember any stories from them?"
Can I tell you like a really like messed up story?
You
This one, I don't know. This isn't, again, this is so long ago that no one's going to be in trouble for this.
all right? It's up to you.
If we could see here, like if we were at a convention, we could get people to raise their hands. Anyone remember a Dune trading card game? This would have been from 98, 9,
Yeah.
97, 8, 9. So Wizard started doing this thing where it was people who were working on different games would have sessions where you could go and learn how to play the game, right? And you signed up for that stuff. I am like a Dune fanatic from when I was like in 7th grade. And there's a Dune trading card game that had just come out. And I was like, well, hell, I'm signing up for that. I mean, right? Take advantage of this thing that,
Not
the workplace provides.
not
So I signed
Doom,
up for that.
right? Not Dune, like the
Dune,
movies that are coming
yeah,
out now.
like Frank Herbert's Dune, right? And so I sign up for that, and I show up at this little conference room, and it's this guy I hadn't met. So he introduces himself, right? We're talking, who works on the Dune trading card game, and he's going to teach us how to play. The only other person who signed up was Peter Adkison, the founder of Wizards of the Coast,
Right.
when he was still there. So who I had meetings and conversations with, so he knew who I was and everything. And so I'm like, sure, Me and the CEO are going to learn how to play the Dune trading card game. Let's go. So the guy starts to teach us how to play this game, and I'm kind of like, okay, sure, yeah, okay, yeah. Totally pretending that I am understanding anything that he's talking about. And, like I had played Magic in the Star Trek The Next Generation trading card game, which I loved, and Blood Wars and everything. And so I'm not like some noob, like I have no idea what you're even talking
Right.
about. It was just like, what? And I'm looking across the table at Peter Adkisson's face, and he's just starting to get like confused. And then it gets a little bit kind of frustrated. And then, which I'd never seen before, angry and angrier and angrier. And then I'm starting to really feel like, oh God, like I'm going to be here for something bad. Like it's just the three of us. So I'm trying, I don't know how to help this guy. This game was incomprehensible. Or he somehow made it incomprehensible, and it was so tragically uncomfortable that it's the kind of thing. I don't remember every meeting I went to with anybody for 15 years I worked there. This one is glued to my memory because I'm just like, how do I, is it possible to be like Ant-Man and just go and just leave this? Like, how do I just disappear from this? Is it possible to just go into the ethereal plane? What are the ways out of this tiny little room where this guy is making his boss's boss want to kill him, and thinking, how much money did I spend on this game that is an unplayable, tragic, what the hell are you talking about? I don't know that was ever, I think it was for sale. I think people
Was it that game?
struggled. It was the Dune trading card game.
It was already out. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh.
And it got like, and I think at some point Peter just said, well, listen, I gotta go to
Yeah.
another meeting. And he just got the hell out of there. And I was like, yeah, I should. And the poor guy who's trying to show us this is now shaking and freaking out because he can see the same thing he's seeing. And he's kind of like, how do I get this back? And there's no way to get it back. It was gone. There's no getting that back. And so I just got out of there and I just went back to my cubicle and I was just like, oh, what the hell was that? I was so unbelievably freaked out. And not because I'm like, oh, that game was really terrible. It might have been amazing. I love everything about Dune. But I felt so sorry for this guy. I wanted to find him, hug him, and say, like, I hope everything's going to be okay for you. Like, I don't know. Like, maybe White Wolf is hiring. I heard that that's a really fun place to work. Like, it was that. So, yeah, that's an epic playtesting session.
That's pretty epic.
And then some.
Dune TCG.
Well,
the Wikipedia page says Steve Winter.
See, it fact check me because I. I wasn't sure who I thought was Gary Gygax, but it wasn't. So I'm not.
I'm pretty. From your description, I'm pretty sure you were looking at.
I think yes, right, because he was like, how is this guy here who's clearly doing no work? No disrespect.
Doug Stewart.
He was never anywhere but sitting in the lunchroom, reading the newspaper, playing bridge. He was like part of the bridge club, I think, right? And then people would come and go. Like they would sit down and have a cup of coffee in the morning. He'd be there, right? They'd come and like he'd rotate out with people. Oh. And sorry, John Pickens, for, putting you into that.
I'm sure I don't have any stories that are popping in my head, but there's a lot of playtesting that happened at Wizards. That was one of the big positive changes. TSR really had the deadline set too tight at that point that there was not a lot of playtesting that went on in the office. People playtested on their own time, but when we got to Wizards, there was a point where it just came up for the R&D team, for the RPG R&D team. Tuesday afternoons was playtest. Like
Mm-hmm.
you weren't doing any work. Everyone had a playtest they were playing,
Uh,
and so there was those. And then my regular game, once third edition got to the point that it was being developed rather than designed. Uh,
mm-hmm.
I played in a third edition campaign that Chris Perkins, who's still there to this day, Chris Perkins ran,
Uh-huh.
and that was our Monday night game that went on. We were still playing it when 3.5 came out.
Mm-hmm.
Stopped being a playtest, and it just became our
And then
campaign.
it just became for fun, which is
Yeah,
what it should be.
and
So
it
speaking of
was
Chris Perkins,
yeah.
here's some insight about Chris Perkins. And Stan, I know you know this. The greatest handwriting of any human I have ever seen in
Oh
my life.
wow!
How he does what he does on a whiteboard, it's uncanny. I
And his
mean,
maps.
he should be making videos about how to do that. When I would write on a whiteboard, I'm not used to doing that at that angle, so it would just be like all going in different directions, and it would be kind of like I'm like this with my hand. I'm all full of ink because I'm like making letters that don't make sense. Just perfect, and on this line that was exactly. I swear to God, if you measured that, it must have been exactly
Right.
horizontal to the Earth, like you could land the space shuttle on it. Just perfect handwriting.
everything at the same type size all the way
Exactly.
across. Yeah. No.
Just like locked in, like it was like he was somehow like, I think he might be some sort of a robot. I'm throwing that out there. I
You're not
don't
the
know
only
for
person that
sure.
thinks that.
I think he might be an android. Is it because he's Canadian? I don't know what it is, but handwriting beyond human capabilities.
And he would draw these perfect maps. So
Hmm.
we used to play in one of the conference rooms, the ones that had the whiteboards that could print out what was on them. And so
Only the greatest invention ever
yeah,
for role playing games. I would run games too, and it was like, how do I get one of these for my house, and how do I bring one of these back in time to like the games club? You know, like it just unbelievable. It even had a grid pattern on it. I
yeah,
mean, it was just the greatest thing ever.
yeah. But so we would print those out, and they looked better than some of the stuff that wound up going into products. The stuff that he just
No,
did up on
right?
the whiteboard.
It
It
just
was crazy,
uncanny.
just
I do.
crazy.
Oh, I forgot about those whiteboards. I think I still have the printout from the original brainstorming meeting for the War of the Spider Queen series, where
Mm.
it was all hashed out on that, and I printed them out. I think I still have those tucked away somewhere. I should have dug those out for
No,
show
because
and tell.
someone would want to steal them from you.
No, I know, right? Screen capture, and now it's out there.
All right. So we're even with our little break from technical difficulties, we're still closing in on an hour and a half here. So I want to switch. I try to wrap these up with kind of just looking at the fact that we're at the 50th anniversary. The reason I started this whole
Hmm.
show, and you and I both go back to playing 45-ish years. We played of the 50 years that D&D's been around. We've been playing for 90 of them between us.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yikes.
we've gone through all that the initial obscurity and
Hmm.
the satanic panic and
Oh,
the
yeah.
the various eras of growth. Just kind of looking back as a 50-year
Hmm.
thing. Um, what do you are there are there lessons you've learned? Are there things you look at and go, I never thought this would happen? Are there eras where
Hmm.
you say, wow, that was great, I wish we could recapture it? What
Yeah.
what are you thinking here on the 50th anniversary?
To me, it really comes down to, and I have a video on my YouTube channel where I just go through my old original first edition player's handbook, and I just flip through the pages and I really talk about sort of that journey for me, right? For that starting out as that literal freshman in high school and
Right.
because I have it here where I went to my very first convention and I stuck my name tag in there.
Nice.
And so it became a thing where I started to stick my name tags for every convention. And it just tells the story of like, this is Gen Con 14. And then this is what Gen Con became later. And then my first staff badge, right? And I just have kept this going for just years and years and years, right? With all these
Wow.
convention badges. So to me, it's like, kind of this life story, right? It was never not a part of who I was. And it was all of the friends that I had all the way through high school.
Hmm.
Um, it became a career, which is like, how did that happen? And it was, and while I was in high school, just playing D&D and going to school because it was Games Club Day. That was the only reason I was there. Like, okay, whatever, blah, blah, blah. We're going to start playing D&D pretty soon. And my parents would actually said more than once, if you spent more time on your homework than you do on that stupid game, you could have whatever great career you want. I was like, nope. I spent time on the game and I had exactly the great career that I wanted. Thank you very much. Right. So that to me, that right, think about it in terms of being 50 years old. And I wasn't there for the very, very beginning, but I was there for right just when it was about to become something that people were talking about.
Right.
I guess it's just another reminder of how old I am, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing where it's like, stop telling me that things are 50 years old. That seems like it was yesterday, or 40 years old. That was like, I was doing that, it's like, right. And, but I mean, I have two kids. One of them turned 30 this year. And so, it's, what's D&D to me, and what does it mean in 50 years? It means that last, 45 years or so of my
Yeah.
entire existence.
What do you think the game is going to see in the next 10 plus years?
Here's what I'm amazed by, right, is clearly the video game sphere took away, right, from tabletop role-playing games right around that time that we were both leaving the company, and it seemed like there was a really difficult time there. The economy was in the process of collapsing. Great time to introduce a new edition of the game. Right? Fourth edition goes right into the teeth of, well, we're all basically, it's going to be Road Warrior this time
Yeah.
next week. I know it's going to be more of a live action kind of thing. But, to see that not just sort of survive the World of Warcraft, where that's the old fashioned, goofy way of doing things, and we're doing it this way now, which is obviously still happening at the same time. But the way that people rediscovered this in like the 2010s, and it became something that people are streaming, that has developed a giant audience of people who don't look exactly like us, right? Um, and when I first started playing it, there was like girls playing D&D. It could never happen. Like there's just no way in hell. And just to see that it's developed, and people are understanding and finding how great it is to be in a room with friends doing this, right? And sitting in the circle and telling a story with each other, and not being kind of like we are now, right, across
Right.
screens, or even then, right? That the internet has allowed people to, play with friends in distant places. The fact that it's still going, and that it's developing in different ways, I love it, right? Because we were part of that sort of middle period of D&D, and there were already, right, first edition diehards who are like third edition is dumb and bad, and it's all min-maxing or whatever it is. And so there was always an edition wars, because the best edition of D&D is the one you first started playing,
Yeah.
period. Yeah. And I just love that it's still there, and that there's another whole like generation of people at Wizards who are doing their thing,
Mm-hmm.
this thing. It's their turn, right? We had
Right.
a turn. It's people before us had a turn. It's their turn, and I love that they're still doing it out there.
All right. That's awesome. That is a very positive future vision.
Yes.
All right. So I've got the fantasyhandbook.wordpress.com up there on the screen. Folks, check that out. Every Tuesday you make a new post, and you've been doing it since 2009. It's a lot of
15
posts.
years. And so, it's not just, don't just wait till Tuesday, because there's a lot of stuff. Right?
You can't catch up in one Tuesday.
A book, the best of Fantasy Author's Handbook. The first volume is out already, so you can find that there.
Yeah.
It's just, if you are writing fantasy or science fiction, horror in particular, or just fiction in general, go there, learn some stuff.
Phil, it has been awesome chatting with you. I mean, it always is, but I'm glad we could do this and share some of your wisdom with the peoples.
So what time tomorrow are we going to do it?
We'll be back again tomorrow night. Do it again. Do it thing. Well, I say to so many people, right? There's so many things we didn't talk about today. Right? The pre-show, we kind of go through some of the things. We haven't hit everything there.
Oh my God.
And there's so much more. So yes, I would love to have you back on to do this again.
Any time, literally, any time.
Thank you. All right, so you hold on. I'm going to take you off screen and do an outro, and then you and I can make our goodbyes.
Okay.
So,
bye,
but
everybody. Thanks for watching.
All right, so that was my conversation with Phil Athans. We had a little bit of tech problem. Those of you who are watching live, those of you who are watching in repeat, you will have seen that I've spliced some of that together. I won't have taken out anything too important, but there's got to be some reward for showing up. That's what the people who showed up get. They got to see the whole thing. Phil, as I was saying before, you can find him on the URLs that I now can't pull up to show you. But AthansAssociates.com was the one that I remember easily. FantasyHandbook.wordpress.com. Ha-ha, I'm not so dumb. Please go check them out. And for us here, of course, we've got our 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com, where you go, you'll get to see the finished version of the drawing I was working on as soon as it's done. You will get all the information on who's coming up and where to find links to the repeats, and if you're a subscriber, you'll get access to merch. Oh, here's the thing I haven't talked about a bunch. I've been making prints of these homages as I finish them, and it took me a while. I think I talked about that last week. It took me a while to find a proper printer, but now I've got prints of all the ones that have been done so far, from the initial D&D game up to the 3rd edition D&D adventure box. I've got all those in prints, and they're available, and the only people who can buy them are subscribers. Of course, if you are a paid subscriber, you then get a discount. So, but I don't push the paid subscriber thing. Become a free subscriber, please do. I will be back next week. I'm not sure off the top of my head who my guest will be, but it will be someone fun and interesting. So I hope you'll come back. Same time, same channel, and hopefully, fingers crossed, no tech whammies. So until next time, take care. Bye.